everyone, I'm Setsuko, MOBA Division Director for Grievance, and I'm here today with a Smite God Guide for Ah Muzen Cab. So what we're going to do is take a look at his abilities and the synergies that they have, as well as take a look at some of the stats you should focus on when you're building an item build for him. However, we're not going to cover specific item builds because they're based on so many different factors that, you know, they change often, and it's hard to come up with the best build. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the practice jungle, and we're going to select Ah Muzen Cab, get him leveled up enough so that we have access to all his abilities, and then take a close look at each one. Alright, so let's get him leveled up just enough to get all of his abilities.
Minions have spawned.
Grab some items. Don't really care what they are. Alright. And here we go. So anytime you want to learn how to play a god, you're going to want to open up your skill menu, and you're going to want to take a really good look at everything in here and take everything into consideration, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start with Ah Muzen Cabs. I'm just going to call him Muzen or Cab. I don't know. Anyway, we're going to start with his passive, which is bees. It says enemies afflicted by bees take damage every 0.5 seconds for 3 seconds, so you're going to get 6 ticks of damage, and are revealed on the minimap. The bees will also attack any nearby enemies that aren't already affected by bees, continuing to spread to enemies over time. This is a pet ability, meaning that it's based on something that your pet does. It affects the enemy, does physical damage, and has a radius of 30. And that radius is the radius in which they will jump to enemies that aren't already infected with bees. And the damage per tick is 8 plus a percentage of your attack damage. Now I can't show you the passive because it's not a default. It's something you get from your other abilities. So we'll take a look at that when we look at his abilities in detail. His basic attack is based on his physical power, and it does not have any sort of progression. So you're going to get 100% attack speed, 100% damage auto attack every time. So looking at his first ability, this is called Hive. It's a ground targeted ability, which means that you're going to get a little circle that you can put out somewhere on the ground, not targeting any enemies. And it affects him and has a radius of 80, which is absolutely huge. That's one of the largest radiuses that you're going to get from an ability in Smite. And it says, bees swarm at the ground target location, creating a new hive that provides movement and attack speed buffs to Ah Muzen Cab. He also heals for a small amount every second while he remains close to the hives. The hives can only be destroyed by basic attacks, and you can have a maximum of 6 hives. So what you're going to do is, you're going to be able to put out a hive. And now, within the radius of the hive, you're going to have that bonus movement speed, attack speed, and some healing. And you can put out up to 6 of these hives. So what you can actually do is you can kind of, if you see here, this is the radius of this hive, so we can go like right here and put another hive out. And then you'll see that this is going to extend our radius up even further. Just waiting for the cooldown here. Alright, so now you can see that we have an even larger area coded, and we can even drop a hive right there as well. You can see this whole area we're going to have increased attack speed, increased movement speed, and that healing as well. Alright, and for each point that you put into hive, you're going to increase the healing that you gain, the movement speed that you gain, and the attack speed that you gain, in addition to increasing the cost. The cooldown is going to remain the same. So basically every point that you put into hive is going to increase all the buffs that you get from it. So if you're wanting to increase the effectiveness of your hives, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and put points into that. Your second ability is called Swarm. This is a line ability, which means that it is going to affect a line in front of you. And this affects enemies, is physical damage, and has a range of 70. It says Ah Muzen Cab summons a large swarm of bees that fly forward in a path in front of him, dealing damage to all enemies hit and applying bees to them. So this is the first ability that is going to apply bees, his passive. So, go ahead and show you this. We're going to go over to one of the little minion camps. So we have this line attack. When we cast it, they're going to get infected with bees. And just so we remember, this is going to deal damage, but the damage over time that you're going to see is because of the bees' passive. So you'll see we threw that out. They're infected. So we did the initial damage with our line attack, and then they got infected with bees, which did some damage over time. For each point that you put into Swarm, you're going to increase the damage, not the bees' damage, just the initial damage, as well as the cost, and you're going to reduce the cooldown. So if you want to use Swarm more often and you want that initial hit to do more damage, then put more points into that. Just keep in mind that it doesn't affect the damage output of your damage over time from your bees. So that initial 213 we just saw there, that will go up. Damage over time will not. His third ability is called Honey. This is a ground targeted ability, so once again you're gonna see a target on the ground. This affects the enemies and does physical damage. So it says Ah Muzen Cab sprays honey at a movable ground target location, slowing all enemies in the area. Bees from hives within 55 feet and bees from swarm will fly over to protect the honey, dealing damage every 5 seconds and applying bees to all enemies as they leave the honey. So a couple of elements here. First, you get the ground target location, and you basically are going to left click and you'll be able to paint an area with honey, and as you can see there, the bees from this swarm will actually leap over and add to the honey here. So now this sort of becomes an AoE area of bees, in addition to slowing the enemy as well. And you can see that if we cast Swarm and then we put out bees, we're going to get bees from Swarm and the hive. Okay, so your hives can produce bees, but only when you're using honey as well. And for each point that you put into honey, you're going to increase the damage per tick done by the bees in the honey. Not the bees from your passive, the bees that fly over to the honey. It increases the damage for those. And it also increases the slow caused by the honey as well as the cost. And the cooldown will remain the same. Now the good thing about honey is, it is, you can kind of shape it however you want, which we'll look at in just a minute. Alright, and his ultimate ability is called Stinger. It's a line ability, so once again we're going to have an attack in a line. It affects enemies, does physical damage, and has a radius of 70. So he fires off an enormous stinger that deals damage to all enemies in the line, sticking into the first god that is hit, applying bees, your passive bees, and crippling them for 3 seconds. If the target dies, or after 3 seconds, the stinger falls onto the ground for 4 seconds. If Ah Muzen Cab picks up his stinger, he gains significant reduction to stinger's cooldown. So we have a line attack. It'll do damage to all enemies in the line, and then it'll also stick to an enemy god if you hit an enemy god and cripple them, which will prevent them from using movement abilities. Then if you're able to pick up the stinger once it falls, or when the god dies, you get huge reduction on the cooldown. So we will go over to Ra real quick, and we will hit him with the stinger, just so you can see the cooldown reduction is 80%, so it's a 90-second cooldown. but you'll see if we hit raw with it. Stinger's going to drop. We pick it up. We're now down to a 16-second cooldown, which is huge. Just incredibly huge cooldown reduction there. So for each point you put into Stinger, you're going to increase the damage done. However, the cooldown reduction, cost, and cooldown itself are always going to stay the same. So, with that in mind, let's talk about some of the strategies and synergies that you can use when you're playing Ah Muzen Cab. Now, obviously, we already talked about how you can sort of like set up a lane to have all these hives, so as you move down the lane, you always maintain the buff that you gain from the hives. In addition to that, that ensures that your honey is always usable. Now your honey, you could do a couple of things. You can do some zone control by painting it across. So now any enemy that comes through here is going to be infected with bees, and then those bees are going to infect other enemies, and etc. etc. You can also use honey to paint. You could do a shorter area, thicker like that. Basically, honey is really good to use for zone control, for making people get infected with your bees. You can also shoot the honey ahead of you like that, so if you are chasing an enemy, you can alright, so here we are, we're chasing an enemy, and we can slow them down a little bit with that, as well as if there's a hive nearby, or if we can throw a swarm, we'll get those bees in there and add that damage over time. Not to mention that we have our ultimate, which can cripple a god as well. So he has a lot of ways to slow down an opponent that's either chasing him, because honey, you can also do this, you know, not as effective, but anything that's chasing you and runs through here is going to be slowed by the honey as well. So lots of synergy between his different attacks and using bees. What I have found playing Ah Muzen Cab is that he does have a lot of damage over time, but I find that he is the strongest when he is utilizing the buffs from his hives, and he's getting all that attack speed, movement speed, healing, and everything else, and then, you know, having those hives and the ability to put down the honey and stuff like that is just really significant. And he's very good at poking because of his damage over time abilities. So, I mean, this is a pretty long range on Swarm, and you just throw it out, and now they're infected with the dot. And because the bees scale based on your physical damage, or your physical power, the more power you have, the more damage over time they're going to be taking. Not to mention, if you have a hive up and the enemy's over there, you know, you can, at the edge, throw your honey out on the edge of your swarm or your hive radius, and the bees will extend into the honey that's actually out of the effective radius of the hive. So lots of good things you can do there. When you are building him, he's a hunter, so you're going to want to focus on the general things that hunters are the things that are important to hunters. So you're going to want physical power, you're going to want attack speed, you're going to want crit damage, because the majority of your damage, if you haven't noticed from watching this video, is actually going to come from your auto attacks. So you can see I'm getting a ton of criticals and just doing massive damage with my auto attacks. So I mean, if we look, let's see, I'll go ahead and level him the rest of the way here, just because I want to show you. So let's say we level up every single skill to maximum. We've got a full set of items here. So we're going to go over and we're going to fight let's say we're going to fight we'll just go with the fire giant. Okay, so right now we've got 280 on our swarm, which is an ability we can kind of spam because, you know, it doesn't cost a whole lot and it doesn't have a really long cooldown. And then we have Stinger, we've got 595 damage. So if we go to the fire giant, we throw this out, cool, we got 258 and we're ticking for 11. if we use our ultimate, okay, we just hit him for 368. But look at our auto attacks. See how fast we're attacking and how much damage it's doing? You know, we're just destroying him with our auto attacks. So even though you have these abilities here, you're still a hunter. The majority of your damage is still going to come from your auto attacks, so you don't want to forget about that. And with that in mind, I mean, I think that Swarm is good to have a point in to apply bees, just for the little damage over time, kind of wear people down. Honey is good to have for the slow and the additional application of bees. But I think Hive is really, really good to buff for him because that additional movement speed, attack speed, and healing is going to do a lot for you in terms of your auto attacks. So, with that being said, if you are looking for an item build or an item guide for Ah Muzen Cab, feel free to contact me and I can point you in the direction of some good web resources. Or if you want more specific details, we could even talk through an item build or something like that. This has been the Smite God Guide for Ah Muzen Cab. I'm Setsuko, and I will see you in the next guide.